Luke had always found solace in the quiet hours of the night. After a long day at his new job in the city, the idea of returning home via the midnight train seemed like the perfect way to unwind. The station was deserted, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an eerie stillness. The clock above the platform struck 12, its chime echoing through the empty space. As he approached the platform, the old clock tower loomed overhead, its shadow casting a long, dark line across the ground. The midnight train was a relic, a forgotten service that few people still used. Its carriages were vintage, with wooden panels and brass fittings that hinted at a bygone era. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of rain that had yet to fall. Luke glanced around, noticing the solitary figure of the conductor standing by the entrance to the last carriage. The conductor was an older man, his face weathered and lined, eyes tired but alert. He nodded at Luke as he approached, a silent acknowledgement of their shared solitude. Stepping onto the train, Luke felt a chill run down his spine. The interior was dimly lit, the overhead lamps casting long shadows that danced across the rows of seats. The seats were upholstered in deep red fabric, worn from years of use, but still comfortable. He chose a window seat, the only available one, and settled in, pulling his coat tighter around him. The doors closed with a soft hiss, and the train began to move, its wheels clicking rhythmically against the tracks. Luke watched as the station receded into the darkness, the city lights fading into the distance. The carriage was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of other passengers and the steady hum of the engine. He took out his phone, contemplating whether to check the time or simply enjoy the silence. Minutes turned into hours as the train sliced through the night. Luke noticed that the other passengers were an unusual assortment. There was an elderly woman knitting a scarf, a young couple whispering softly to each other, and a man staring blankly out the window, lost in his thoughts. No one seemed to speak, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken stories. As the night deepened, the shadows in the carriage seemed to grow longer, stretching across the floor and creeping up the walls. Luke felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that he wasn't alone despite the few people around him. The train continued its relentless journey into the darkness, and Luke couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the corners of the carriage. He tried to dismiss the feeling, attributing it to the isolation and the late hour. But as the train sped through the night, the atmosphere became increasingly oppressive. The lights flickered intermittently, casting brief moments of stark illumination that revealed unsettling details. Reflections in the window that didn't match the passengers, fleeting glimpses of movement where there shouldn't be any. Luke's mind raced with questions. Where was the train headed? Why were there so few passengers? And why did they all seem so detached? He glanced at the conductor, but the man remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the tracks ahead. The train seemed to be moving faster now, the scenery outside becoming a blur of darkness and fleeting lights. A sudden drop in temperature made Luke shiver. He wrapped his coat tighter, trying to stay warm, but the chill seemed to seep into his very bones. The silence was broken only by the sound of the train's wheels and the distant, almost imperceptible ticking of a clock. Luke looked around once more, searching for something, anything, to explain the growing dread that gnawed at him. As the train hurtled through the night, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he was embarking on a journey unlike any other. The midnight train was no ordinary ride home. It was the beginning of something mysterious and unsettling. And as the darkness pressed in around him, Luke realized that his quiet night was about to take a turn into the unknown. As the midnight train continued its silent journey through the night, Luke began to settle into the rhythm of the ride. The initial unease he felt gradually gave way to a cautious curiosity. He glanced around the carriage, observing the other passengers more closely. Each person seemed enveloped in their own world, their expressions blank and their movements minimal. It was as if they were mere shadows inhabiting the space, disconnected from one another. Luke tried to engage with the elderly woman knitting her scarf, hoping to break the monotony. He approached her seat and cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me, how long have you been on this train?" The woman looked up, her eyes empty and unfocused. She offered a faint, almost mechanical smile. Long enough, she replied in a monotone voice, her fingers never stopping their rhythmic motion. Luke felt a shiver run down his spine, but dismissed it as the chill from the drafty carriage. He turned to the young couple whispering in the corner. Their heads were close together, but when he attempted to overhear their conversation, all he heard were indistinct murmurs that seemed to fade into the background noise. The man glanced at Luke briefly before returning his attention to the woman beside him, his eyes distant and unseeing. As the train moved deeper into the night, the ambient sounds grew more peculiar. Luke heard soft footsteps echoing from the empty seats at the far end of the carriage, though he couldn't see anyone there. The hum of the engine seemed to resonate more loudly, blending with the faint creaking of the old wooden carriages. Occasionally, he thought he heard whispers, but whenever he turned to locate their source, the sounds ceased abruptly. Sitting back in his seat, Luke tried to shake off the growing sense of unease. He reached into his pocket for his phone, considering scrolling through his messages or checking the time, but the device felt unnervingly heavy in his hand. Instead, he chose to stare out the window, watching as the darkness outside blurred into a seamless expanse of black. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. It was hard to tell in the dimly lit carriage. The train seemed to glide effortlessly through the night, yet there was no sign of movement or progress. Luke's mind began to wander, contemplating the oddities he was witnessing. Why were the passengers so detached? What was the purpose of this midnight journey? He decided to explore the carriage further, hoping to find something that might explain the strange atmosphere. As he walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoed loudly, amplifying the silence that surrounded him. He passed by another passenger, a middle-aged man engrossed in a book, but when Luke tried to catch his attention, the man barely glanced up before returning to his reading. Reaching the back of the carriage, Luke noticed a door that seemed slightly ajar. He approached it cautiously, pushing it open to reveal a darkened compartment. Inside, there was only a solitary seat and an old-fashioned lantern hanging from the ceiling. The lantern cast flickering shadows that danced across the walls, creating an unsettling play of light and darkness. Curiosity piqued, Luke stepped inside the compartment. The air was colder here, and the scent of damp would fill his nostrils. He glanced around, noticing a small table with a single, unfinished ticket stub lying on it. The stub was dated years ago, its edges frayed and the ink faded. Luke picked it up, turning it over in his hands, but found no additional information that could shed light on its significance. As he placed the ticket stub back on the table, the lantern flickered more intensely, and the shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally. Luke felt a presence behind him and spun around, but there was no one there. The door to the compartment slammed shut with a sudden force, plunging him into near darkness. His heart raced as he fumbled for the door handle, pulling it open to return to the main carriage. Back in the aisle, Luke took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The compartment had seemed innocuous at first, but now it felt like a gateway to something unknown. He returned to his seat, the memory of the flickering lantern lingering in his mind. Sitting down, Luke glanced once more at the other passengers. He noticed subtle changes. The elderly woman's knitting had become faster, her eyes occasionally darting toward the window as if expecting something. The young couple now sat motionless, their faces pale under the dim lighting. The man who had been reading earlier was now staring blankly ahead, his book untouched. A low, almost imperceptible humming filled the carriage, blending with the other ambient sounds. Luke strained to identify its source, but found nothing out of place. The humming seemed to resonate within him, amplifying his sense of dread. He tried to focus on his surroundings, but the oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to concentrate. As the train continued its silent passage through the night, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every glance over his shoulder revealed nothing, yet the sensation persisted, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He felt an invisible weight pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe and think clearly. Determined to maintain his composure, Luke decided to pass the time by reading the small notebook he always carried in his jacket. He opened it to a blank page, intending to jot down his thoughts and observations. But as he began to write, the pen slipped from his fingers, leaving an ink-stained mark on the page. Frustrated, he tried again, only to have the notebook's pages turn to blankness as soon as he touched them. Panic began to rise within him. The midnight train was no ordinary journey, and Luke felt increasingly trapped in its mysterious grip. He looked around desperately, searching for any clue or sign that could help him understand what was happening. But the other passengers remained impassive, their eyes devoid of life and their actions mechanical. Just as Luke was about to give in to his fear, the humming ceased abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. The lights in the carriage dimmed further, casting everything into near darkness. Luke's breath caught in his throat as he felt the temperature drop once more, the chill seeping into his bones. In that moment of oppressive stillness, a shadow moved swiftly across the window, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Luke's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to confront the source of the movement, but there was nothing there. The sense of being watched intensified, and he felt a presence looming over him, invisible yet undeniably real. He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, but when he opened them again, the other passengers had vanished. The carriage was empty, save for him. The lights flickered once more, and the window revealed nothing but endless darkness outside. Luke's mind raced with questions and fear. Was he alone on this train, or had the others transformed into something else? As the train hurtled onward, Luke realized that the midnight train held secrets far beyond his understanding. The first signs of something sinister had emerged, and he knew that his journey was only beginning. With each passing moment, the mystery deepened, and the terror of the unknown pressed ever closer, enveloping him in its relentless grip. As the midnight train pressed onward, the atmosphere inside the carriage grew increasingly oppressive. Luke sat alone, his mind racing with unanswered questions and an escalating sense of dread. The sudden disappearance of the other passengers left him feeling isolated, yet the lingering presence he couldn't quite identify kept him on edge. The silence was almost tangible, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels against the tracks. Luke tried to focus on his breathing, attempting to calm the anxiety that tightened around his chest. He glanced around the empty carriage, searching for any sign of movement or life, but found nothing. The windows offered no clues, only the endless darkness outside that seemed to swallow any hint of the world beyond. Suddenly, a faint whisper pierced the silence. Luke froze, his heart pounding in his ears. He strained to listen, but the whisper was too soft to discern any words. It seemed to come from all around him, echoing off the walls of the carriage. He looked around, eyes wide with fear, but saw no one. The whispering continued, growing slightly louder, more insistent. Luke could feel his skin crawl as the voices seemed to wrap around him, speaking in hushed tones that sent shivers down his spine. He leaned back in his seat, trying to block out the sound, but the voices persisted, layering over each other in a disorienting chorus. Desperate for answers, Luke stood up and moved to the front of the carriage, hoping to find the conductor and seek some form of reassurance. The seats were still empty, the oppressive darkness making it difficult to navigate. As he approached the conductor's compartment, the whispering grew louder, now accompanied by a low, mournful hum that resonated deep within his bones. Reaching the front, Luke found the conductor's door closed, the old handle cold to the touch. He knocked gently, calling out, "Excuse me, sir. Is everything all right?" There was no response. The door remained shut, and the whispering seemed to seep through the cracks, intensifying his unease. Luke hesitated, unsure of what to do next. He placed a hand on the door, feeling a faint vibration that pulsed through his fingers. Gathering his courage, he pushed the door open, half expecting to find someone, or something, waiting inside. The compartment was empty, bathed in shadows that seemed to dance and shift with an unnatural fluidity. The overhead lamp flickered sporadically, casting brief, harsh light that revealed nothing but the empty space. Luke stepped inside, searching for any clue that might explain the eerie sounds, but found nothing of substance. As he turned to leave, The door slammed shut behind him, plunging him back into darkness. The whispering ceased abruptly, replaced by an overwhelming silence that pressed down on him like a physical weight. Luke's pulse quickened, and he struggled to steady his breathing, the confined space heightening his sense of claustrophobia. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in as the realization that he was trapped washed over him. Luke pounded on the door, shouting for help, but his voice seemed swallowed by the thick darkness. Desperation clawed at him as he searched the compartment for another way out, finding nothing but more shadows and silence. Just as Luke was about to resign himself to his predicament, a sudden noise drew his attention. It was a soft, almost imperceptible tapping coming from the far corner of the compartment. He turned his head, eyes straining to make out any movement, but saw nothing. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. Summoning his remaining courage, Luke approached the corner where the sound originated. The shadows seemed to coalesce there, forming vague, indistinct shapes that twisted and writhed in the dim light. The tapping grew louder, more urgent, as if whatever was making the noise was desperate to be heard. Luke reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of what felt like a solid barrier. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold, clammy sensation that spread through his arm. He recoiled, heart racing, as a low whisper echoed in his mind. "Stay." The message sent a jolt of fear through him, and Luke stumbled back, collapsing into a nearby seat. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the supernatural encounter. Was the train haunted? Were the voices the remnants of lost souls trapped in this endless journey? The questions swirled in his head, each one more terrifying than the last. Determined to find a way out, Luke took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. Not now. Gathering his thoughts, he decided to explore the rest of the carriage, hoping to find something, anything, that could help him understand what was happening. As he moved through the dimly lit rows, the oppressive silence seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a faint, eerie melody that floated through the air. It was a haunting tune, one that seemed both beautiful and sorrowful, resonating deep within him. Luke followed the sound, his footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floors. The melody led him to a door at the end of the carriage, one he hadn't noticed before. It was different from the others, ornate and slightly ajar, with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Luke pushed the door open, revealing a small, secluded compartment bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Inside, he found an antique piano, its keys worn but still gleaming under the light. The melody emanated from the instrument, each note ringing clear and pure. Luke approached the piano, mesmerized by the sight and sound. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the keys, feeling an inexplicable urge to play. As he pressed down gently on a key, the piano responded with a harmonious note, blending seamlessly with the existing melody. Encouraged, he began to play, the music flowing effortlessly from his fingers. The haunting tune grew richer, filling the compartment with its melancholic beauty. Luke felt a sense of calm wash over him, the fear momentarily forgotten as he lost himself in the music. But the tranquility was short-lived. As he continued to play, the shadows around him began to shift and twist, forming into indistinct shapes that hovered at the edges of his vision. The melody took on a darker tone, discordant notes interspersed with the original tune, creating a sense of unease that crept into his heart. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the compartment was plunged into darkness once more. Luke's fingers hovered above the keys, confusion and fear replacing the earlier calm. The whispering returned, louder and more insistent, surrounding him from all sides. "Don't leave," the voices demanded, echoing in his mind. Luke felt a surge of panic, the realization dawning on him that the midnight train was far from an ordinary journey. He had to find a way to break free from whatever sinister force held him captive. Taking a deep breath, he turned away from the piano, determined to confront the darkness that surrounded him. As he retraced his steps back to the main carriage, The oppressive atmosphere intensified, the shadows pressing in on him from every direction. The whispers grew louder, their words now a cacophony of fear and desperation. Luke's resolve wavered, but he pushed forward, driven by the urgent need to escape. Reaching the door, he found it ajar once more, the way it had been before. Without hesitation, he stepped through, the eerie melody fading behind him. The carriage welcomed him with its familiar emptiness, but the sense of being watched remained, a constant reminder of the unseen forces at play. Luke sank back into his seat, exhaustion and fear weighing heavily on him. The midnight train continued its relentless journey through the darkness, each passing moment deepening the mystery and terror that surrounded him. As he glanced around the empty carriage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that the voices and shadows were merely the beginning of the horrors that awaited him on this endless, haunted ride. The eerie silence of the midnight train pressed heavily on Luke's shoulders as he sat alone in his seat, the oppressive atmosphere making it difficult to think clearly. The whispers and shadows from earlier had left him shaken, but he knew he couldn't afford to succumb to fear. Determined to understand what was happening, Luke decided to observe the carriage more carefully, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. He glanced around the empty seats, searching for any sign of movement or life. The elderly woman who had been knitting earlier was now motionless, her needles paused mid-air as if frozen in time. The young couple had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the faint scent of their perfume lingering in the air. Luke felt a chill run down his spine but pressed on, his curiosity outweighing his fear. As he turned his attention to the man who had been staring blankly out the window, Luke noticed something peculiar. The man's reflection in the glass seemed distorted, his eyes hollow and devoid of any emotion. It was as if the reflection was a separate entity, mirroring Luke's growing unease. He rubbed his eyes, blinking rapidly, but the image remained unchanged. The man in the window continued to stare back at him, an unspoken plea for help etched into his empty gaze. Unable to ignore the unsettling sight, Luke stood up and approached the man's seat, hoping to engage him in conversation. "Excuse me," he began cautiously. "Is everything okay?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head to face Luke, his movements jerky and unnatural. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Luke felt an inexplicable connection, as if the man was trying to communicate something beyond words. But before Luke could say anything else, the man's form began to shimmer and fade, disappearing entirely from the seat. Luke blinked in disbelief, the reality of the situation sinking in. Shaken, Luke took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He realized with a sinking feeling that the passengers on the midnight train were not ordinary travelers. They seemed to be trapped in some kind of spectral existence, their lives intertwined with the train's endless journey. The realization was both terrifying and fascinating, igniting a desperate need to uncover the truth behind this mysterious voyage. As he stood there, processing what he had just witnessed, the train lurched unexpectedly, jolting Luke off his feet. He grabbed onto the nearest seat for support, his mind racing with questions. What was the destination of this train? Why were these souls trapped here, unable to move on? And most importantly, how could he escape this nightmare? Determined to find answers, Luke decided to explore the carriage further. He walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. Each step seemed to amplify the sense of isolation, making the carriage feel even more confining. He passed by the empty seats, each one a silent testament to the passengers who had vanished before him. Reaching the end of the carriage, Luke noticed a door he hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, the dim light from inside barely illuminating the darkness beyond. Hesitant but driven by necessity, he pushed the door open and stepped into a narrow corridor. The walls were lined with old-fashioned paintings, their subject's eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. The corridor extended into darkness, the only sound the distant hum of the train's engine. As he walked deeper into the corridor, Luke felt a growing sense of unease. The air was thick with an unspoken presence, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step he took. He reached the end of the corridor, where a large, ornate door stood. It was adorned with intricate carvings that depicted scenes of the train and its passengers, their faces twisted in expressions of fear and longing. Taking a deep breath, Luke pushed the door open and stepped into a grand lounge area. The room was vast, with high ceilings and large windows that offered a panoramic view of the endless night outside. The furniture was antique, arranged in a way that suggested past gatherings now long forgotten. In the center of the room stood a grand chandelier, its crystals shimmering faintly despite the dim lighting. As Luke entered the lounge, he felt a presence behind him. He turned slowly, expecting to see one of the spectral passengers, but the room was empty. The air was heavy, and the silence was almost deafening. He approached a large fireplace, its mantel adorned with old photographs and memorabilia. Picking up one of the photos, Luke saw a group of people smiling warmly, their faces alive with joy. It was a stark contrast to the hollow expressions of the passengers he had encountered earlier. A sudden chill swept through the room, and the chandelier flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Luke felt an inexplicable urge to look out the window, and as he did, he saw the train moving through a landscape that seemed both familiar and otherworldly. The scenery outside was a blur of dark forests and misty hills, the moon casting an eerie glow over the land. It was as if the train was traveling through a realm that existed outside of time and space. As he turned back to the lounge, Luke noticed a figure standing near the fireplace. It was a woman, her dress old-fashioned and elegant, her face pale and sorrowful. She looked up as he approached, her eyes meeting his with a depth of sadness that pierced his soul. "Welcome, Luke," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We've been waiting for you." Luke felt a surge of fear and confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "What is this place?" The woman took a step closer, her presence both comforting and unsettling. "This train is a vessel for lost souls," she explained softly. "We are all bound to its eternal journey, unable to find peace or move on. But you, Luke, have a choice. You can help us break free or remain trapped here forever." Luke's mind raced, struggling to comprehend her words. "How? How can I help?" She reached out a hand, her touch cold but gentle. "There's a way to break the cycle," she said, "but it requires courage and understanding. You must confront the darkness that binds us and find the key to our release." Before Luke could respond, the woman began to fade, her form dissolving into the shadows of the lounge. "Time is running out," her voice echoed, lingering in the air long after she was gone. "Choose wisely, or you will join us." Left alone in the grand lounge, Luke felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him. The realization that he was entwined in this spectral journey was both daunting and terrifying. But beneath the fear, a spark of determination ignited within him. He couldn't abandon these lost souls to their eternal torment. Whatever it took, he would find a way to break the cycle and free himself and the others from the midnight train's haunting grip. As he left the lounge and made his way back to the main carriage, Luke knew that his journey was far from over. The ghostly revelations had only deepened the mystery, but they had also provided a glimmer of hope. With each step, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face the unknown horrors that awaited him on this endless, haunted ride. The Grand Lounge had left Luke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since boarding the midnight train. The woman's words echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the responsibility he now bore. As he made his way back to the main carriage, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to tighten around him. Each step weighted with the gravity of his mission. Sitting once again in his seat, Luke took a moment to gather his thoughts. The revelation that the train was a vessel for lost souls bound him to a path he never anticipated. Determined to find a way to break the cycle, he began to scrutinize his surroundings with renewed intent. Every detail, every shadow, every flicker of light seemed significant, potentially holding the key to their salvation. The train continued its relentless journey through the night, the scenery outside remaining an indistinguishable blur of darkness and fleeting lights. Time seemed to lose all meaning within the carriage, minutes stretching into hours without any change in the environment. Luke pondered the possibility that the train was caught in an endless loop, replaying the same journey night after night without progress or pause. As he delved deeper into his observations, Luke noticed subtle patterns emerging. The same conversations, the same movements of the passengers, the same flickering lights. It was as if the train was reenacting a specific moment in time, trapped in a perpetual state of recurrence. He began to suspect that the cycle was not merely a random occurrence, but a deliberate mechanism designed to keep the souls tethered to the train. Determined to test his theory, Luke decided to leave his seat and explore the carriage once more. The absence of other passengers made the carriage feel like a vast, empty expanse, each step echoing ominously against the wooden floors. He passed by the seats where the elderly woman, the young couple, and the man with the hollow eyes had once been, now nothing more than empty spaces holding on to fading memories. Reaching the back of the carriage, Luke found the door to the narrow corridor he had previously traversed. This time, he approached it with a different mindset, searching for any signs of repetition or clues that could reveal the nature of the cycle. The corridor was silent, the old paintings on the walls watching him with their unblinking eyes. He walked slowly, his footsteps measured and deliberate, aware that any misstep could trigger the cycle to reset. As he reached the ornate door at the end of the corridor, Luke noticed something he hadn't before: a small, intricate clock embedded into the woodwork above the doorway. The clock face was cracked, its hands perpetually stuck at 12 o'clock, the same time the train had departed the station. It was a symbol of the eternal loop, a reminder that time on the midnight train was frozen, unable to move forward or backward. Luke examined the clock closely, tracing the delicate carvings with his fingers. He wondered if manipulating the clock could influence the cycle, perhaps providing a way to break free. Carefully, he reached out and attempted to move the hands, but they remained stubbornly fixed in place, refusing to budge. Frustration welled up within him, but he refused to give up. There had to be a way to disrupt the cycle, to free the souls trapped on the train. As he pondered his next move, the atmosphere in the corridor shifted. The temperature dropped sharply, and an unnatural stillness settled around him. Luke felt a presence nearby, a silent watcher observing his every move. He turned, searching for the source of the sensation, but saw nothing, only the endless darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. Determined to find answers, Luke continued his exploration, moving past the clock and into a smaller room he had previously overlooked. The room was sparse, containing only a wooden desk and a single chair. On the desk lay a stack of old tickets, each one bearing the same cryptic symbols and the date 12/00/000 stamped in faded ink. Luke picked up one of the tickets, feeling the weight of countless untold stories pressed into the paper. As he examined the ticket, a realization dawned on him. The symbols resembled a map, a guide to navigating the mysteries of the midnight train. He carefully studied the patterns, trying to decipher their meaning. The map seemed to outline specific locations within the train, each marked with the same enigmatic symbols found on the tickets. It was a blueprint, a guide to understanding the train's inner workings, and perhaps the key to breaking the cycle. With the map as his guide, Luke felt a renewed sense of determination. He knew that uncovering the secrets of the midnight train was the only way to free himself and the other souls trapped within its confines. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness and uncertainty, but Luke was resolute. He would follow the map's guidance, no matter where it led, in search of the truth that lay hidden within the train's endless journey. As he left the small room and returned to the main carriage, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly, as if acknowledging his newfound resolve. The other passengers, though still distant and detached, now held a flicker of hope in their vacant eyes. Luke realized that he was not alone in his quest, that the collective will of the trapped souls could be harnessed to break the cycle. The train continued to move forward, its destination still unknown, but Luke no longer felt helpless. He had a mission, a purpose that transcended his fear and uncertainty. The midnight train was more than just a vessel of lost souls. It was a prison bound by time and darkness, and Luke was determined to find the key to its release. As the hours passed, Luke delved deeper into the mysteries of the train, each discovery bringing him closer to understanding the nature of the eternal cycle. He began to notice subtle changes in the environment, signs that the cycle might be starting to shift. The flickering lights became more stable, the whispers less frequent, and the oppressive weight lessened slightly, as if his efforts were making an impact. But with each step forward, the challenges grew more complex. The train seemed to resist his attempts to disrupt the cycle, presenting him with obstacles that tested his resolve and sanity. Shadows deepened, whispers turned into voices, and the very fabric of the train seemed to warp and twist around him, creating a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. Despite the mounting difficulties, Luke pressed on, driven by the desperate need to free himself and the other souls from the midnight train's relentless grip. The journey through the eternal cycle was fraught with psychological terror and supernatural forces, but Luke's determination remained unshaken. He knew that the only way to escape the endless journey was to confront the darkness that bound the train and find the elusive key to their salvation. As dawn threatened to break the eternal night, Luke stood at the threshold of discovery. The cycle was beginning to show signs of change, and the path to freedom was within his grasp. But the deeper he delved into the train's mysteries, the more he realized that breaking free would require more than just understanding the cycle. It would demand a confrontation with the very essence of the midnight train's haunting existence. With the map in hand and a heart full of courage, Luke took a final step toward unraveling the secrets of the eternal cycle. The midnight train, a vessel of fear and despair, held its secrets close, but Luke was determined to uncover the truth and bring an end to the endless journey. The fate of the trapped souls now rested on his shoulders, and he was prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead in his quest to break the cycle and escape the midnight train's eternal grip. The midnight train continued its relentless journey through the darkness, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on Luke. The map he had discovered in the small room provided a glimmer of hope, but navigating the train's mysteries alone seemed an insurmountable task. He knew that to break the eternal cycle, he would need more than just determination. He would need allies. As he pondered his next move, Luke felt a presence beside him. He turned to see a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a vintage suit that matched the train's old-fashioned aesthetic. The man's eyes held a mixture of fear and determination, and his demeanor suggested he had been on the train for some time. Luke took a deep breath, deciding to approach him. "Hi, I'm Luke," he began cautiously. "I think we're both trying to figure out what's happening here." The man nodded slowly, his expression guarded. "I'm Ethan," he replied. "I've been stuck on this train for what feels like years. I've been searching for a way out, but every attempt seems to lead us back to where we started." Luke felt a surge of relief at finding someone else who understood his predicament. "I found a map," he said, pulling out the crinkled paper from his pocket. "It might help us navigate the train and find a way to break the cycle." Ethan leaned in to examine the map, his eyes scanning the intricate symbols and markings. "This could be our guide," he mused. "If we follow it, maybe we can uncover the secrets that keep us trapped here." Encouraged by their initial connection, Luke and Ethan decided to pool their knowledge and resources. They began by sharing their individual experiences on the train. Ethan spoke of recurring visions and unexplained phenomena, while Luke recounted his encounters with the spectral passengers and the mysterious woman in the Grand Lounge. Each story added a piece to the puzzle, revealing the depth of the train's supernatural hold. As they delved deeper into their investigation, they encountered other passengers who were willing to join their quest. There was Maya, a young woman who had boarded the train seeking solace after a personal tragedy, and Samuel, an older man with a wealth of knowledge about trains and their histories. Each new member brought unique insights and skills, strengthening their collective resolve. Together, the group began to explore different sections of the train, following the map's guidance. They discovered hidden compartments, secret passages, and rooms that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. In one such room, they found an old journal filled with cryptic entries and drawings that hinted at the train's dark origins. The journal spoke of a powerful entity that bound the souls to the train, feeding off their fear and despair to maintain its control. Determined to confront this entity, the group devised a plan. They believed that by understanding the entity's nature and uncovering the key to its power, they could weaken its hold and break the cycle. Their journey was fraught with challenges, supernatural barriers, eerie apparitions, and psychological traps that tested their courage and unity. Yet, with each obstacle they overcame, their bond grew stronger and their hope rekindled. One night, as the train sped through a particularly dense stretch of darkness, the group found themselves in a grand dining car. The room was elegantly set, with a long table adorned with tarnished silverware and dusty chandeliers. At the far end stood a large portrait of the train's original conductor, his stern gaze seeming to follow their every move. As they examined the room, they discovered another clue, a hidden drawer containing an old key engraved with the same symbols as the map. This must be the key mentioned in the journal, Maya speculated, holding the key up to the dim light. It's likely the key to unlocking the train's secrets. With the key in their possession, the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that their next step would be to locate the entity and confront it directly. As they prepared for the inevitable confrontation, tensions ran high. Doubts and fears surfaced, threatening to undermine their unity. But through open communication and mutual support, they managed to stay focused on their common goal. One evening, as the train passed through a particularly eerie tunnel, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped sharply. The air grew thick with an unspoken tension as the entity made its presence known. Shadows danced along the walls, and a low, menacing hum filled the air. The group stood together, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. As they approached the heart of the train, the true extent of the entity's power became apparent. It manifested as a dark, shifting mass, its form constantly changing and adapting to their fears. The entity taunted them, attempting to sow discord and doubt among the group. But Luke, Ethan, Maya, and Samuel remained steadfast, their combined strength providing a shield against the entity's manipulations. Drawing upon the knowledge they had gathered, the group began to unravel the entity's weaknesses. They realized that the key they had found was not just a physical object, but a symbol of their collective will to break free. By channeling their courage and unity through the key, they could weaken the entity's hold on the train. In a final, desperate effort, the group confronted the entity, using the key to channel their combined strength. The dark mass writhed and shrieked, resisting their attempts to break free. But the power of their alliance proved too strong, and the entity began to dissipate, its form unraveling into nothingness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the train seemed to slow, the endless journey finally coming to an end. As the midnight train approached its final destination, the group felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. They had faced their fears, forged unbreakable bonds, and shattered the entity's hold on the train. One by one, the spectral passengers began to fade, their souls finally finding peace after years of torment. Luke looked around at his newfound friends, gratitude and hope shining in his eyes. "We did it," he said softly. "We broke the cycle." Ethan nodded, a smile spreading across his face for the first time since boarding the train. "We couldn't have done it without each other." As the train came to a halt, the doors opened to reveal a serene landscape bathed in the soft light of dawn. The group stepped off the midnight train, their burdens lifted and their spirits renewed. They had not only found a way to escape the train's eternal grip, but had also formed lasting friendships forged in the crucible of fear and adversity. The midnight train had served its purpose, its dark secrets finally unveiled, and its hold broken by the strength of unexpected alliances. Luke and his companions walked away from the train, leaving behind the shadows and embracing the promise of a new beginning. The nightmare was over, and they had emerged stronger and united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in the light of day. The serenity that followed the group's successful attempt to break the midnight train cycle was short-lived. As Luke and his companions stepped off the train into the dawn-lit landscape, a profound sense of relief washed over them. The oppressive darkness that had enveloped the train for what felt like an eternity was gone, replaced by the gentle hues of a new day. They took a moment to breathe in the fresh air, savoring their freedom after the harrowing ordeal they had endured together. However, the tranquility was deceptive. As they began to disperse, each member of the group felt an inexplicable pull, a lingering connection to the midnight train that refused to be severed. Luke glanced back at the train, expecting it to remain stationary, but to his astonishment, it began to move once more, the doors closing silently behind them. A chill ran down his spine as he realized that their escape was not as complete as they had believed. Determined to understand what was happening, Luke rejoined Ethan, Maya, and Samuel. The others shared his unease, their faces reflecting the same confusion and fear. "We thought we were free," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "But the train is still moving. What does that mean?" Maya, ever the voice of reason, suggested they investigate further. "Maybe there's more to this than just breaking the cycle. Perhaps the train is connected to something else, something we haven't discovered yet." Samuel, with his extensive knowledge of trains and their histories, proposed they follow the train discreetly. If the train is still active, there might be a reason it's not stopping. We need to find out what's driving it and how it's connected to us. The group agreed to embark on a new quest, one that would take them deeper into the mysteries of the midnight train and beyond. They decided to return to the station, hoping to gather more information and perhaps find a way to permanently sever the train's hold on their lives. As they approached the station, the landscape around them seemed to shift. The serene dawn gave way to an unsettling stillness, the air growing colder and the shadows lengthening unnaturally. The station, which had appeared peaceful moments before, now seemed foreboding, its architecture twisted and distorted as if warped by an unseen force. Undeterred, the group entered the station, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. They navigated through the unfamiliar layout, guided by a sense of urgency and the faint sounds of the train's distant movement. As they reached the platform, they saw the midnight train in motion, its carriages gliding smoothly along the tracks despite the lack of visible propulsion. Luke approached the train cautiously, the memories of their previous encounter fueling his determination. He reached out to touch the train's exterior, but his hand passed through the solid surface as if it were made of mist. "It's like the train isn't really here," he murmured, his mind racing to comprehend the phenomenon. Ethan examined the surroundings, noticing symbols and markings similar to those on the map they had found inside the train. "These symbols must hold the key to understanding what's happening," he said. "We need to decode them to figure out how to stop the train for good." Maya suggested they split up to cover more ground, each taking a section of the station to search for clues. Reluctantly, the group agreed, understanding that time was of the essence. They dispersed, their footsteps blending with the eerie silence that now permeated the station. As Luke delved deeper into the station's labyrinthine corridors, he stumbled upon a hidden door concealed behind a faded tapestry. Pushing it open, he discovered a room filled with old photographs, journals, and artifacts related to the train's history. Among the clutter, he found a dusty ledger that detailed the train's origins and the events that had led to its supernatural existence. The ledger revealed that the midnight train was originally a luxurious express meant to symbolize progress and connectivity. However, a series of tragic accidents and mysterious disappearances had tainted its legacy, transforming it into a vessel for lost souls unable to move on. The ledger hinted at a ritual performed by the original conductor, intended to keep the train running eternally, trapping the souls of its passengers in an endless loop. As Luke absorbed the grim history, he realized that the ritual was the source of the train's power and the reason it continued to operate despite their attempts to stop it. "We need to find a way to reverse the ritual," he thought, determination hardening his resolve. "That's the only way to break the train's hold once and for all." Meanwhile, Ethan and Maya made their own discoveries. Ethan found an old timetable with cryptic annotations that seemed to map out the train's supernatural pathways. Maya uncovered a series of letters exchanged between the conductor and an unknown entity, revealing hints about the ritual's requirements and the means to disrupt it. Samuel, using his knowledge of trains, identified a central control panel hidden within the station. It was the likely source of the train's persistent movement. If we can disable the control panel, he explained, we might be able to stop the train permanently. Reuniting at the central hub, the group shared their findings and formulated a plan. They decided to perform a counter-ritual, using the information from the ledger and the letters to negate the original enchantment. The process required precise coordination and unwavering focus, as any misstep could reinforce the train's power instead of weakening it. As they prepared to execute the plan, the station's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, and the air hummed with an ominous energy. The train's presence loomed over them, its ethereal form flickering between reality and illusion. With the necessary components gathered, the group began the counter-ritual, chanting the incantations detailed in the ledger. The room responded to their efforts, the symbols on the walls glowing with an otherworldly light. The control panel began to malfunction, sparks flying as the train's supernatural power started to wane. Suddenly, the station was filled with a deafening roar as the train resisted their attempts to stop it. The air crackled with energy, and the spirits of the trapped souls materialized around them, their expressions a mix of hope and desperation. The entity controlling the train manifested, a dark, swirling mass that sought to protect its dominion over the midnight train. The group stood their ground, their unity and determination providing a shield against the entity's malevolent influence. Luke felt a surge of strength as he led the final part of the ritual, channeling his will to break the train's hold. The entity lashed out, attempting to disrupt their efforts, but the group's collective resolve held firm. With a final, powerful incantation, the counter-ritual reached its climax. A blinding light enveloped the station, and the oppressive energy dissipated as the train began to slow. The entity's form began to unravel, its dark essence breaking apart under the force of the group's united efforts. As the light faded, the midnight train came to a complete stop, its carriages fading into nothingness. The spirits of the lost souls were freed, their gratitude evident as they vanished into the morning light. The station returned to its peaceful state, the shadows receding and the air growing calm. Exhausted but triumphant, the group stood together, witnessing the final dissolution of the midnight train's spectral presence. They had succeeded in their mission, breaking the eternal cycle and liberating the trapped souls. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming, but so was the realization of the ordeal they had endured. As they prepared to leave the station, the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, signaling the end of their nightmare. The landscape around them seemed transformed, bathed in the warm light of dawn, a stark contrast to the darkness they had left behind. They walked away from the station, their bonds strengthened by the shared experience, knowing that they had overcome something truly otherworldly. Yet, as they reached the outskirts of the station, a lingering unease settled over Luke. The successful counter-ritual had come at a cost, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something still watched from the shadows. The morning seemed too perfect, the silence too complete, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Determined to dismiss his fears, Luke turned to his friends. "We did it. We're free." But deep down, he knew that their journey was far from over. The midnight train had left an indelible mark on their lives, and the mystery surrounding it hinted at greater forces at play. As they walked into the light of a new day, Luke couldn't help but wonder if the true battle had only just begun. The group parted ways, each carrying the weight of their experiences and the knowledge that the supernatural forces they had encountered might still be lurking in the shadows. Luke looked back one last time, seeing the station fade into the distance, but the image of the midnight train lingered in his mind, a reminder that some mysteries are never truly solved. With a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, Luke continued his journey, unaware that the true horror was yet to come. The midnight train had been defeated, but its legacy of fear and the unknown would continue to haunt him, drawing him deeper into a world where the line between reality and the supernatural was forever blurred. The first rays of sunlight bathed the landscape in a warm, golden hue as Luke and his companions walked away from the station. The oppressive darkness that had clung to them for so long was now replaced by the promise of a new day. They had succeeded in breaking the midnight train's eternal cycle, freeing the trapped souls and severing the train's supernatural hold. Relief and exhaustion washed over them, their bonds forged in fear now strengthened by triumph. As they moved further from the station, the world around them seemed to transform. The air felt lighter, and the shadows that had once loomed ominously were now mere remnants of the night's terrors. The group exchanged weary smiles, each person silently acknowledging the ordeal they had endured together. Luke glanced back one last time, expecting to see the midnight train fading into nothingness. Instead, the train stood before them, its carriages shimmering with an ethereal light. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in his mind, but then the train began to dissolve, the spectral form breaking apart as the first light of dawn touched its edges. The train's presence was finally eradicated, its legacy of fear and despair lifted from the land. As they continued their journey, the group felt a sense of closure. Maya, who had been a beacon of hope throughout their quest, spoke softly. "We did it. The souls are free, and the train is gone." Ethan nodded, his usual guarded demeanor softened by relief. "It feels like a weight has been lifted, but I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there." Samuel, ever the historian, added, "The ledger mentioned that the train was bound by a ritual. Perhaps there are other remnants or forces connected to it that we haven't discovered yet." Luke listened, the remnants of fear still lingering in his mind. He knew that while they had succeeded in their immediate goal, the supernatural forces they had encountered might not be entirely vanquished. The midnight train had left an indelible mark on their lives, and the mysteries surrounding it hinted at deeper, more profound truths. As the group approached a crossroads, the path ahead seemed clear, yet the shadows of their experiences lingered. They decided to part ways, each taking a different direction to return to their lives, forever changed by the night's events. Luke felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving his newfound friends, but knew it was necessary. Before they parted, Maya turned to Luke, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Luke. We couldn't have done this without you." Luke smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We did it together. Take care of yourselves." With final farewells exchanged, the group dispersed, each person carrying the weight of their shared experience. Luke found himself walking along a winding path, the morning sun guiding his steps. The lingering unease from the station began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and resilience. As he walked, Luke reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the lonely boarding at midnight to the final confrontation with the unknown, each step had tested his courage and resolve. He realized that the true horror wasn't just the supernatural forces they faced, but the internal struggles each person had overcome. Reaching a clearing, Luke paused to take in the beauty of the new day. The landscape was vibrant, filled with the sounds of nature awakening. Birds sang in the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, symbolizing the end of the nightmare they had endured. Just as Luke began to feel a sense of peace, a faint sound caught his attention, a distant whistle, reminiscent of the train's haunting call. He turned towards the sound, his heart racing. The whistle grew louder, a familiar yet eerie tune that sent chills down his spine. Luke's mind raced, recalling the map and the symbols that had guided them through the train's mysteries. He realized that the midnight train might have left behind remnants, echoes of its existence that could resurface. Determined not to let fear take hold, he followed the sound, his steps steady and resolute. The whistle led him to an old, abandoned railway track that seemed out of place in the serene landscape. The track stretched into the distance, disappearing into the horizon. As Luke approached, he noticed a faint glow emanating from the rails, the same ethereal light that had once enveloped the midnight train. Taking a deep breath, Luke reached out to touch the glowing tracks. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, and the world around him seemed to shift. The familiar whistle transformed into a dissonant wail, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Before him stood a new train, its appearance different, yet hauntingly similar to the midnight train. The realization hit him. While they had succeeded in breaking the cycle, the supernatural forces behind the train were not entirely defeated. The train's legacy was far from over, hinting at a deeper, more complex battle that awaited. Luke stood his ground, the lessons learned from his previous ordeal fueling his determination. He knew that the journey was not yet complete and that the true confrontation with the unknown was still to come. With a resolute heart, he stepped towards the new train, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. As he boarded the train, the doors closed behind him, and the whistle echoed once more through the morning air. The midnight train story had taken an unexpected turn, leaving Luke to navigate the thin line between reality and the supernatural. The final chapter of his journey was just beginning, and the true nature of the midnight train remained shrouded in darkness, promising new tales of terror and suspense for those brave enough to listen.